the experience that someone brings with them, rather than the fact that they can say, like, I've got a first from X, Y, and Z university, and I've got first-time passes. That for me is far less relevant than the character that the individual is and the experience that they bring.
Thanks for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure.
The reason why we decided to do it was everyone always wants to know what it takes to be a finance director, what it takes to be a CFO, how you kind of got there, and if there's any insight you can share, we can share that with our wider finance community. So sure. Just kind of just essentially helping people. But what we'll do is start off with is, so what do you do in your current role for Red Funnel? Because you're the Chief Financial Officer there.
So I'm CFO at Red Funnel. I've been here coming up to 2 years in February. What I have a responsibility for finance, which is great. I have responsibility for IT, which is IT development and IT operations. Also have responsibility for procurement, and it's pretty common nowadays for FDs to have a remit which is wider than just the numbers. And that's kind of my areas of responsibility. I'm sure my other directors think I have a really annoying habit of sticking my nose into a bunch of other places as well, because for me, being in finance is all about understanding how businesses work and how things fit together. And I think to do that, you've got to have a really good understanding of, or try and have a good understanding of everything. There's bits of our business I don't have a complete grasp of, but I think it's really important that you try and get under the skin of the business that you're in.
Yeah, and when people think about Red Funnel, they think about the Isle of Wight, the red chair. I guess there's also a lot of history as well.
There's a bucket load of history. One of the things which is I love about this business. I'm a historian. I did history at university, and if you walk out of my office door here, on the wall facing is a copy of one of the ledgers from 1911, which was the year that Titanic sailed, and she sailed from Southampton, and she was pulled out of Southampton on a maiden voyage by tugs from Red Funnel, and outside is the ledger which shows all the tug entries and how much they paid for each tug, and that for me is just wonderful. I go downstairs, there is an archive downstairs that I could lose myself in for hours, and around the office I've got various different bits of kind of Red Funnel paraphernalia and history floating around. I've got a bit of a reputation here of being a bit of a history geek. So, and one of the things I actually did in lockdown was I've written a book. So that was so it was the 80th anniversary of Dunkirk, and quite a few of our vessels got involved in Dunkirk, and I've done a whole load of research to find out which ones they were, how many people they saved, what happened to them, and I pulled it all together in a book, and I just need to find somebody to help me publish it.
So where you mentioned the CFO typically wear lots of different hats. Yep. What would you say a typical day looks like in your role?
It's a long time since anybody can describe a typical day in their roles. I think particularly as you move up through an organisation, the typicality of a day changes dramatically. So as you start your finance career, then your day is normally very structured. It's very organised. You broadly know what you're doing and when you're doing it. And as you move up through an organisation, and particularly as you move up through finance, a typical day becomes very, very untypical. And so what I was doing today is very different than what I was doing yesterday, and will be extremely different to what I'm doing tomorrow. So, and I think that's part of the attraction, is that there no 2 days are the same, and no two experiences are the same. And that for me is part of what keeps it really fresh and keeps you on your toes and keeps you learning, which I think is really important.
As you kind of go up the ladder and get more senior, you make a plan, and then you kind of squiggle.
It never happens. But when I was a lot younger, I had a career plan. I wanted to be a PLC board director by the time I was 40. I'd got this plan about how to get there, and none of it happens. And I think the reality of it is you have to take the opportunities that are in front of you. You've got to take the opportunities which feel right for you at the time, rather than hanging out for, I have to, on my career plan, the next step is there, and therefore I've got to wait for that, because actually you may have a very circuitous route to get to where you want to get to. And I think, they're great bits of paper, but one thing I can guarantee is pretty much nobody will follow their career plan. I think it's really important not to, if you're not following your career plan, cut yourself a bit of slack and don't beat yourself up about it.
Yeah.
And just be realistic to accept the fact that you are making the right choices for you at that time, which hopefully lead you on the direction that you want to go, but may not.
How did you get into finance, and what made you want to establish that career?
I'd love to be able to tell you, Matt, that I had some great dream from the time I was 6. I got an N in my A-level maths, and I'm not even sure they still do those anymore. I went to uni. I went to uni to do a history degree. I did history and economics at UCL. I did that because it gave me a BSc for doing a history degree, which I thought was pretty cool at the time. I had too much of a good time in the first couple of years at uni, and I kind of finished my second year with a pretty solid 2-2, but there's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted something a little bit better than that. And so I realised that going into my third year, I needed to A, get a really good degree out of it, and B, get a job. And it was at a time when you used to have milk rounds at unis, and you literally had businesses and sectors would turn up at unis and you go and meet them and have a chat with them. And it just so happened that the finance guys turned up before the bankers or the lawyers or anybody else. So I went along to the finance open day that they did. I went through a process. I applied for 9 different jobs. I got offered 8 of them. So I thought that was probably a pretty good indication that I should probably do that. I accepted one of them and I thought, right, I don't need to worry about my job anymore. I've got a job and I'll now focus on my degree. I often look back and think, well, if the lawyers had turned up first or the bankers had turned up first, would I have become one of those, and would I have enjoyed it as much as I enjoy this?
And where was your first job? What were you doing?
My first job, just to show how old I was, the offer that I accepted was for a company called Deloitte Haskins and Sales, which became Coopers & Lybrand Deloitte by the time I joined it. So I started off training as a chartered accountant, and we were going in and auditing companies, and we'd be auditing them for 3 months. And I'd go along and audit BT, and you'd lose yourself in some great big tower block. And I was in Bristol at the time. You just really didn't understand how it all fitted together. And I did first couple of years at Chartered, and I jacked it in after a couple of years because I found it the most dull thing in the world. And I went off to become a fighter pilot or join the police force. That was what I was going to go and do. So that was the plan. And I left my chartered accountancy career behind me, and I went off to go through RAF selection and go through police selection. And whilst I was doing that, because I'm pretty kind of impetuous and do things, I'd resigned from Coopers, but I didn't have a role to go to. So I went and got myself a job as a management accountant in a distribution company down in Westbury in Wiltshire, which is where I was living at the time. And I got taken under the wing of a finance director there, a guy called Rod Williams, who was a great guy. And he basically showed me that actually what I hated was auditing. And he introduced me to a world of kind of management accounting, and which basically showed me that I do a piece of work, someone would come along and take that bit of work off my desk. So they'd take this bit of analysis that I'd done on Lotus, and they'd go and make a decision on it. And I thought that was so cool that someone would take my bit of work and they'd make a decision which would have an influence on what was going on in the business at the time. And for me, that just really lit the kind of that's when I think I got the bug. But what Rod had shown me was the fact that I disliked auditing, but actually quite liked accounting. So he kind of wound me up and pointed me in the direction of SEMA, but effectively Heron, which was the company I was with at that time, didn't really have the ability to sponsor studies or to kind of give me the work experience I needed. And so I went off and joined a company called Early Learning Centre, so the retailer, and I effectively qualified with them. I actually qualified in Southampton. But yeah, that's kind of how I really started that. And that's that. So I started doing chartered, absolutely hated it. And I've ended up becoming a SEMA qualified accountant.
How did you find your studies? How did you approach your studies?
I think it's really important that there is no one size fits all when it comes to studies. So, I studied a long time ago. I've been fortunate enough to be able to train and develop a whole bunch of guys that have worked for me over time. And I think what's really clear is that there isn't one answer for everybody, and everybody needs to do what works best for them. I'm not a huge advocate of first-time passes. I think it's good. It shows that you're good at exam technique and things like that. But actually, what's more important to me is the experience that someone brings with them, rather than the fact that they can say, like, I've got a first from X, Y, and Z university and I've got first-time passes. That for me is far less relevant than the character that the individual is and the experience that they bring. And I think sometimes actually, if you haven't got first-time passes, but you've qualified in an environment which is even more challenging, where you've maybe been a single parent, where you've maybe had caring responsibilities or something like that, I think that it holds far more weight than the fact that you're actually really good at exam technique and you've done loads of practice questions. I studied at BPP. I was fortunate to be sponsored, and in those days sponsorship meant effectively taking some time out, going down to BPP, doing courses during the week and at the weekend, and then getting kind of doing exam practice and things like that with them. it's moved on a lot since then. But I think the reality of it is, for me, that worked really well. So for me, it was about solid periods of time where you just effectively did nothing but that. I think that works for me. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. Other people need to see it and experience it in a work environment to really make it land. Don't underestimate the time commitment for doing it, and don't underestimate the impact that it has on those around you, because you will often be disappearing away at times. I remember not going to various different family events because I had to study for some exams, and you make a lot of sacrifices as you're going through the process, and you have to be really comfortable with that, I think.
People will learn in a different way. You get some people that are really good at doing exams in that environment, but you get some accountants that are great, but just in that environment, that exam environment, just don't do well.
It's the commitment at the end of the day that you've shown to qualify.
Exactly.
And nobody understands everybody else's different circumstances or environment that they operate in. If you do it in 18 months or you do it in 5 years, it sort of doesn't matter. To me, it's the fact that you've shown the commitment to do it, you've knuckled down, you've done the work, and you've balanced it with everything else that is going on.
In your experience, would you say that having a finance qualification has been quite important to get to where you are now?
I'd say it is. I'd say it's really unusual to see a CFO that doesn't have a formal finance qualification. I think particularly in larger organisations, and we're an SME we're the M bit of SME in Red Funnel, but in organisations, I've been FD of businesses that have turned over 1.1, 1.2 billion pounds, and it's almost unheard of to have CFOs in those businesses that aren't qualified. I've come across some absolutely brilliant guys that I've worked with and that have worked for me that have not been qualified, and for whatever reason have chosen to stop their studies at a certain point. I think it's more common to potentially not have a qualification if you're in a smaller organisation. But I think it's increasingly rare, and I would encourage anybody, if they're going to take this profession seriously, is to qualify. I think having a qualification is far more important than having a degree in this sector. I think if you want to be taken serious in this sector, then it's really important to have one of the main accounting qualifications.
Particularly if you want to progress onto that sort of FD, CFO level.
You also have the continued professional education obligations that you've got on having qualified. Yes. So you've got a certainty that individual is still very kind of aware of what the current issues are and things. That's not to say that someone that's decided to stop studying isn't aware of what's going on at all, but there is an obligation on you when you qualify under any of the main qualifications to continue that CPD.
But when did you get your first board position?
I got my first formal board position in 1999 as my first CFO job. The first real FD job that I think I got was in about 2002 when I became FD of a company called Entertainment UK, which at the time was Europe's largest entertainment distribution company, which was part of the Woolies Group. That was the first proper FD job, but I'd been CFO of a branding company in London back in 99.
And how was it? Like your first time kind of sitting on the board, interacting and at that sort of level?
It's really scary. And particularly, I think I in that role, so the Entertainment UK role, I'd gone into that business as a commercial finance controller. So I'd done that for a couple of years, and then I got promoted onto the board. And one of the hardest challenges is changing the mindset of the people that you've worked with. So people who had previously been peers at a controller level or a head of level then became subordinate to you. People who had been superior to you, so all of the other directors on the board, you became peers with. Managing that change and managing how that worked and how you evolved into that was one of the biggest challenges I think that anybody faces initially when they move into a role. I think when you move from FD role to FD role, then I think that's just the challenge of moving into a new organisation, maybe moving into a new sector. But when you get promoted from within, I think it becomes far harder.
What skills do you reckon you need to be a successful finance director, CFO? I
think you need to be really inquisitive. I think you want to really understand how things work. I think you've got to be pretty resilient because a hell of a lot of stuff seems to land on your desk. And you have to be able to be prepared to deal with that and effectively pick that up and sort it out. I think personally, one of the things you've got to be also really determined. You've got to be really determined to be successful in your role, but also to make your business a success as well. There will be a bunch of FDs out there that will have a range of different other skill sets that they think are appropriate. And I think all that shows is that there are, in this role, there are many different skills that you have to have to be successful in it. It's not as simple as saying, I've got the qualification, tick, I'm driven, tick. It's not a tick box exercise. And I think increasingly, gone are the days when the FD used to sit behind a desk, in an old big office and kind of ring up, and they used to come down. They have to go out, they have to be inside in the business, they have to understand the business. They've got to have a really good interpersonal skills. They've got to be able to talk to people. They've got to be able to talk to colleagues throughout the business, not just the board or their finance team. They've got to be able to go out and talk to everybody in the organisation, and that's another massive big skill that I think not only FDs but anybody as they work through their career, it's really helpful if you've got some good interpersonal skills. There's a real skill in also being able to. Finance is great, and it's like lots of professions, but it's great. It creates its own language, and that language can be quite scary and quite off-putting to people who aren't qualified. And I think there's a real skill in being able to translate kind of in the way that we talk into a language which is easy for others to understand and to understand the implications of what you're talking about and what may or may not happen.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to develop a career in finance, or maybe they're just about to get started in finance? What advice would you give to them?
I would research it a little bit more than I did. Would be the start point. Yeah. I think I understand what it is that they want to do. So what does being in finance mean to them? If they can understand what that means, do some research about that, understand what qualification therefore best fits the type of role that you think you're interested in. And as I said when I was talking about study, get qualified. Yeah. But don't underestimate the time commitment that there will be in getting qualified. And as a consequence, the impact that it has on your friends, your family, your partner, your social life, all of those things, and cut yourself a bit of slack on it. So don't going back to the career plan, if you say you're going to qualify in 2 years, don't beat yourself up if you don't. Yeah. Because otherwise all you do is add a whole load more pressure on yourself when you'll already be studying, which is pressure enough, and you'll be probably progressing through the early stages of your career. And we all know that's pretty stressful at the best of times. So I think kind of understand what it is you want to do and which area of finance you want to go into and why. And a good way to do that is maybe to watch, things like this, but also to talk to guys in your industry, when you're talking about different roles, to talk about the skills, the experience, where those roles tend to lead you, to try and build a network of people in the industry that you're interested in and the profession that you're interested in. LinkedIn is a wonderful thing. You and I are kind of big fans of LinkedIn, and I know the Niche Partnership are, but it's actually quite easy now on LinkedIn to reach out to people on it. And I've had people kind of contact me through LinkedIn that I don't know, and just asking, talking about, the career, the path I've maybe gone on and some of the industries I've worked in, and just asking for advice. Yeah. And sometimes you're asked for advice and you won't get a response, or you get a rude response. But you might be surprised that actually sometimes you'll ask for advice and people are very happy to give it.
Knowing that finance is right for you, maybe even just giving it a try, essentially. Lots of employers. I mean, we were speaking to Eastleigh Borough Council, and they were offering with the niche apprenticeship, they were offering to help give someone work experience. Yeah. Andy, the CFO down there, or deputy CFO, said, if you've got someone who is thinking about making that move into finance and wants some work experience to kind of put on the CV, or even see if it's for them, you're more than happy to do that and just give it a try, just to see if you like it before fully committing to it as well.
I've got to say, but that niche apprenticeship is an absolutely superb idea, and I think it really makes you guys. You guys have been really positive throughout this whole pandemic, and I think that really shines through on something like that. And I think I would encourage anybody who is considering or has been unable to study or wants to get into it to look at doing it, because I think it's a brilliant thing. You guys should be really proud of setting it up.
Thanks, Graham. We just wanted to get someone's 2021 off to a
it's a great idea.
Good start. Idea. When you're hiring, what's more important, attitude or experience?
For me, it's personality and attitude. So I'm not a big advocate of the fact that you have to have had experience in the sector that you're in. Yeah. I didn't have experience in the maritime sector before I went into that. There have been a number of roles I've gone into that I haven't had experience in that sector. I think there are, as an accountant, as a trainee accountant, as an NFC, as a head of department, as a CFO, you learn so many transferable skills, and so having kind of sector experience and specific experience, unless it's something so niche that you can't learn it, and you have to know it from day one, it will always absolutely be character, personality, attitude. Hands down the most important things for me, and I would much rather have someone who is driven, much rather have someone who's rolled the shirt sleeves up, gone out, got a job, worked their way through it, and they've got the right attitude and drive and intention, and that for me wins hands down every time.
Definitely, and it goes back to that saying, you can teach skills, but you can't teach someone that attitude and that kind of work ethic. In terms of yourself then, Graham, so what are your professional kind of goals for the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you kind of see yourself?
So, well, for me, I mean, I've found where I think I belong. I absolutely love Red Funnel. There's a wonderful team here. The guys, particularly in the last year, have done some incredible things. We've kept the service running throughout the pandemic. I've got colleagues who've been out on the front line, day in, day out, making sure that the island continues to be supplied, and kind of supporting the island stakeholders. We've got, they talk a lot about key workers, KEY. Be kind of, there are key workers, QUAY out there who've worked in the maritime sector, who have continued to support, this nation. And I think that is often hugely underestimated. Red Funnel for me is home, and I love being here, and anybody that talks to me and knows me will know that when I talk about this place, it's very clear that it's a superb organisation. I think for me, over the course of the next 3 years or so, is effectively trying to erase the last year and try and recover from COVID. That will probably be what most people's aspirations are. But for me, it's about erasing 2020 as quickly as possible and getting us back on the trajectory that we had going into 2020, and in fact in the very early part of 2020. We've got a great team here. We've got some great ambitions. We've got some great ideas, and it's about working with the leadership team here, working with the colleagues out in the business to deliver what is in essence is a truly brilliant business, and being able to make that achieve what it's capable of achieving.
I think, like you said, Graham, like the fact you love the history, Red Funnel's got bags of it. It's the right home for you, and 100%. Thanks for that, Graham. So moving, as I mentioned, what we'll do is we'll finish up with 3 kind of just not about your career, different questions. If you hadn't ended up in finance, where do you reckon you'd be? Do you reckon you would have kind of gone down that RAF route, or not really, because you weren't? I think
that there is the one element of my job that I get involved in quite a lot is the legal side of things.
Yeah.
And I've got this wonderful big 174-page contract sitting here at the moment. And I really enjoy that, and I really enjoy understanding how all of that kind of works together. And I think, in reality, I often say, when people ask me, I say, when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. I think that would be, if I had my chance again, and they were doing the milk round was going around with UCL again, then maybe I'd go and have a chat with the lawyers as well. Not that I'd necessarily take it, because I have thoroughly loved this carear, and hopefully I've still got a little bit of time to go. But I've thoroughly loved this career. It's had some massive ups and downs, and I've met some brilliant and some not so brilliant people in it, as you do throughout it. So I wouldn't necessarily say I didn't want to do it, but I think if a close second would definitely be being a lawyer. I quite like that.
And do you reckon you would have gone down more of the kind of like attorney, like defence, criminal?
No, I really like, aside from the fact that my kids would tell me I'm quite bossy and I like telling them what to do, I like all the commercial law stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So kind of acquisitions, mergers, transactions, all that.
And then, so on the flip side then, what do you reckon you would be, let's say, not so great at?
Anything with numbers in, possibly. I think anything. I have an absolute massive fear of hospitals, of needles, of blood, of anything like that. And I had an incident a couple of years ago which kind of really reinforced that for me. But so I think anything medically related at all that has anything to do with needles or blood or just anything like that, I couldn't do it. And I have a huge amount of respect for people that do. I've got some members of my family who do, and obviously everybody in in the NHS over the last year or so who's doing what they're doing.
And then finally, then, if you could invite any 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would they be and why?
Maggie Thatcher. So Maggie is a huge political heroine of mine. So I grew up in the Thatcher's era.
Yeah.
I was very much one of Thatcher's children, and I'm very proud to say I was. I went to school where being a Tory and being a Thatcher's kid was probably not the smartest thing to do in a comprehensive in Tewkesbury.
Yeah.
But I was, so I'd love to talk to her. She's certainly inspired a lot of the things that I believe in, and I'd love to talk to her and understand a little bit more about her. I'm a big football fan, so Chelsea, the mighty Chelsea, are obviously the team to beat this season. And when you think of Chelsea, there are only 1 or 2 managers that really come to the forefront of your mind, and it has to be the great Jose Mourinho. So I've had the good fortune of meeting Roman Abramovich and having a drink with him.
Okay.
So I'd like to meet Jose and just see whether all the bluff and bluster that you get on all the press, is really the person that he is. I've sat opposite him in a train going up to Manchester once, but I never kind of plucked up courage to chat to him. So I'd like to invite him round for dinner, and then Nicole Kidman, just because she's wonderful. I'd really like to ask her a few questions about her latest programme on Sky, because I still don't really get it. No, I think she's a great actress, and she's ginger, so, all power to the gingers.
And also, we just skirted over the fact that you've had a drink with Roman Abramovich.
So that came about. I'm a huge Chelsea fan. 2005, I travelled a lot with Chelsea and watched them home and away. But one of the places I went to was when Chelsea played Porto. I went with some mates and we stayed in a hotel in Porto before the game and after the game. Went to the game, came back, and we hadn't realised at the time, but it was the hotel that the Chelsea team was staying in. And we as good Chelsea fans went and sat down in the bar, as you do. The Chelsea players were great. They were chatting to us, and eventually we thought we would better give them some space. And we went and sat over in a corner of the bar, and we were actually being very quiet and just chatting amongst ourselves. And this kind of stereotypical Russian gentleman walked over and said in a Russian accent, which I'm not going to do, would you mind if Mr. Abramovich came and joined you? He'd like to talk to you about the club. And we were like, come on, mate, stop taking the mic.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I'm deadly serious. And so Roman and a couple of his advisors came along and they sat with us for about an hour and talked to us about everything that we loved about Chelsea, the things that we wanted to change. He bought us a drink, we bought him a drink, and I've got somewhere still at home. I've got on the Porto programme. I've got his signature. Yeah, really, really nice, interesting, unusual experience. He was just a thoroughly decent man.
Thank you. There's also thank you for sparing us some time.
My pleasure.
I appreciate you're a busy man.